For most nations on Earth, developing and building an air force is a matter of deadly seriousness. The United States has spent decades cultivating its strategic edge with the best aircraft on the planet, the F-22 Raptor, the B-2 Spirit, and the upcoming B-21 Raider. China is pouring resources into its military aviation R&D at an unparalleled scale, so that the reveal of secretive, highly advanced fighter aircraft and absolutely massive drones are practically a weekly occurrence. Europe and Japan pursue sixth-generation fighter aircraft at a breakneck pace. Turkey and South Korea have bent over backwards to design cutting-edge aircraft under their own control, and Russia's trying its best, and that's count for something, doesn't it? Well done, guys. But across the entire world, there is one global air force that lives by the rule of cool and actually manages to pull it off. Right now, the nation of Indonesia is building an absolute fever dream of an air force, a chaotic mismatch of flying technology from nearly every continent on Earth. By the time Indonesia has filled its hangars with aircraft already confirmed to be on the way, it'll fly American dogfighters alongside Russian interceptors, sophisticated French Delta Wings alongside Brazilian prop fighters, the flying pride of Ankara alongside the newest masterpiece from Seoul. Where most nations look at the menu of global fighter aircraft and pick out their favorites, Jakarta looked at the menu and said, I'll have one of everything. So here's what Indonesia did, and here's why it works. Travel to Indonesia right now, find a way to let the nation's government agree to let you onto its air bases, and the Indonesian Air Force you'll witness during your stay, well, it's actually not really that much to look at. Right now, on paper, the nation possesses 110 combat aircraft, with their most impressive assets being 23 copies of the not-that-old, relatively sophisticated American-made F-16C and D. But look under the hood, and the reality for Indonesia today is far less encouraging. Of its 110 fighter aircraft, only about 62 are currently acknowledged as operational. Its Russian-made Su-30s and Su-27s languish without spare parts, the older F-16s in its arsenal are at risk of becoming museum pieces, and the other aircraft it relies on are far from the sort of aircraft you'd want to be flying in a head-to-head contest against a rival global air force. And all of that would be discouraging if it wasn't for the cavalry that's about to arrive. Right now, Indonesia is waiting on no fewer than 144 top-of-the-line aircraft from several nations at once, and it's a couple of strokes of the pen away from bringing that number to about 200. Over the past several years, Indonesia has been on a spending spree, wining and dining with some of the most ambitious aerospace companies on the planet. The nations that Indonesia is entertaining are industry competitors, geopolitical rivals, and at times outright adversaries. But for Jakarta, that's all part of the game. Indonesia's got money to burn. It wants as many high-end combat aircraft as it can possibly procure, and if capitals like Washington, Beijing, and Paris want to trip over each other in their haste to get Indonesia to sign a contract, then it's all part of the fun, isn't it? So, as we take a look at the aircraft inbound to Indonesia's arsenal, we've got to explain one key caveat. Indonesia may have already bought this air force, but it doesn't yet possess this air force. For lots of reasons we're going to get into, Indonesia is coming at this with a sign contracts now, deal with the logistics later sort of approach. It's all but guaranteed that Indonesia will eventually receive all these aircraft, but as we'll describe, some of them they're not even in production yet, meaning that it'll take at least a few more years for Indonesia to truly reach its potential. For our purposes, though, that doesn't really matter. The deals are signed, the aircraft are inbound eventually, and we can already see how this chaotic, good Indonesian Air Force is going to take shape. At the heart of Indonesia's future combat air fleet will be the first fifth-generation stealth fighter ever in Indonesia's arsenal, and the first stealth fighter ever developed outside the big three nations of the modern aerospace world, the US, China, and Russia. The aircraft is known as the Khan, and after it took its first flight in February of 2024, it became the pride and joy of the nation of Turkey. Expected to enter full-scale production by or before 2030, the Khan is a twin-engine, single-seater fighter aircraft that's just as hard to detect on radar, according to Turkey, as the American F-22 and F-35. Capable of flying at Mach 1.8 and carrying up to 8 missiles or bombs concealed in an internal weapons bay, as well as another 6 on the wings, the Khan is meant to serve as a direct competitor to the best fifth-generation aircraft on offer from the US or China, with none of the onerous export restrictions or geopolitical debts that the larger two nations are known for. The Khan is expected to feature a highly advanced avionics suite, including top-of-the-line radar and data fusion capabilities, and it's built to fly alongside a supersonic unmanned drone, a loyal wingman aircraft known in Turkey as the Anka 3. Indonesia signed for 48 copies of the Khan in 2025 at a price of about $10 billion. And while Indonesia will have to compete with other prospective buyers like Egypt, Ukraine, Saudi Arabia, and Azerbaijan, Jakarta has been promised its aircraft within about 10 years. Flying alongside the Turkish Khan will be the South Korean Boromai. First flown in 2022, already in limited production, and set to start flying with South Korea as early as next year, the Boromai, in its current form, is a highly advanced fourth-generation jet, meaning that it's about as close to being a cutting-edge stealth fighter as possible without being able to check all of the boxes that meet that threshold. Starting in 2027, however, the Boromai will be built and sold in a modified version as a fully stealthy fifth-generation fighter. Indonesia has been part of the Boromai project since 2010, and although Indonesia's role in the initiative has been the source of considerable drama between Jakarta and Seoul, Indonesia still expects to acquire 48 copies of the jet as soon as possible. Like the Khan, the Boromai hits a top speed of about Mach 1.8, featuring a respectable combat range, 10 onboard hardpoints, and an advanced avionics suite that puts it on par with just about anything on offer from the US, China, or Europe. In essence, early versions of the Boromai, including those that Indonesia is expected to receive, are only not fifth-generation jets because they don't conceal their weapons in internal weapons bays or use sophisticated stealth coatings, and thus it'll show a larger radar return than a comparable aircraft that can hide its munitions. But even that version of the Boromai is better than just about every fifth-generation aircraft on Earth, and when South Korea integrates new avionics upgrades onto its later models, it's likely that Indonesia will be able to reap the benefits. Beyond just Turkey and South Korea, Indonesia is pursuing a contract with the United States for 24 copies of what might be the most impressive, most blatantly unstealthy fighter on the planet. It's known as the F-15EX, and looking at it from the outside, it looks basically the same as any other F-15 that the US has flown since the jet's first flight back in 1972. Take a look under the hood, however, and the F-15EX is a far more dangerous beast than its predecessors. Built to thunder through the sky at Mach 2.5 with an impressive range and the ability to climb 15 kilometers within a minute, the F-15EX is built less as a traditional fighter aircraft and more as a flying arsenal. Depending on the configuration, a single EX model can carry up to 12 air-to-air missiles, up to 23 bombs and missiles of varying configurations, plus a pair of drop tanks or very heavy weapons that are far too large for a jet like the Khan or the Boromai to lug around. The EX is big, it is loud, and quite literally the opposite of a stealth aircraft, but it's equipped with highly advanced avionics that are built to be continually upgraded as new technology becomes available. Indonesia hasn't yet closed the deal for the EX, but it's expected to sign on the dotted line as soon as it can, possibly once it completely disengages from a deal that appears to be dead in the water to buy Russian-made Sukhoi Su-35s. And just in case there was any doubt about whether nearby China would accept so many advanced F-15s on its doorstep, Indonesia has gone the extra mile to ensure that Beijing knows it hasn't been forgotten. Indonesia made global headlines in 2025 by indicating that it was looking to buy 42 copies of China's J-10C, a relatively low-cost but impressive fourth-generation aircraft that had drawn acclaim just a couple of months prior. Before Indonesia went public with its interest, the nation of Pakistan used the J-10C to shoot down several copies of the internationally respected Rafale made by France's Dassault Corporation. Although it's just an upgrade on prior copies of the J-10, the J-10C represents an overhaul of a similar scale to the F-15EX, integrating lots of advanced avionics, new weapons, vastly improved engines, and other features that put it into the same echelon as the most advanced non-stealth aircraft across the globe. A delta-wing design with a respectable combat range and a top speed of Mach 1.8, the J-10C leverages 11 hardpoints to get the job done and can work with the best air-to-air missiles in China's arsenal, including the now combat-proven missile that Pakistan used against India, the PL-15. And speaking of the French Rafale that the J-10C shot down, France has been a real contributor to Indonesia's fighter bonanza. Notably, Indonesia is working to procure the F-4 version of the jet, a step above the planes that were in India's arsenal when they got shot down, and it integrates long-range sensing and data networking tools that probably would have come in handy for India based on the information available on how those Rafales were shot down. Despite that stain on its record and a couple of other minor black eyes, the Rafale is widely regarded as a high-caliber, capable combat aircraft with a similar top speed and combat range to the J-10C and most of the other jets that we've discussed. It's a powerful delta-wing design with some serious payload capacity, leveraging 14 hardpoints to fire all sorts of NATO standard equipment, and it can add up to 5 external drop tanks to dramatically extend its range. Like the other aircraft on our list thus far, it's equipped with a modern avionics suite, and in French service, it's built to launch nuclear weapons, although it would be a very real surprise if Indonesia ended up needing that feature. All told, that's 5 advanced combat aircraft that Jakarta is looking to procure between the Turkish Khan, the South Korean Boromai, the American F-15EX, the Chinese J-10C, and the French Rafale. Yet, even that is not the full story of Indonesia's combat air wing. As we mentioned, the nation still flies a couple of dozen American F-16s, as well as a handful of Russian Su-27s and nearly a dozen Su-30 multi-role aircraft that are known for their high speed and long range. The nation flies 13 copies of the South Korean-made light fighter, the Fa-50 Golden Eagle, a cheap, nimble, and easy-to-fly aircraft that Indonesia wants 19 copies of in total. It flies 13 copies of Brazil's prop-powered Super Tucano, an aircraft that, at first glance, looks as if it belongs in World War II, but combines a long-range, long-endurance, highly rugged design with modern avionics to create one of the more interesting and effective close air support aircraft in the world. Indonesia also flies a handful of copies of Britain's Hawk 200, a training model that was redesigned as a dedicated combat aircraft, although those are going to be phased out very soon. And technically speaking, there's still a chance that Indonesia could procure a couple of dozen Russian-made Su-35s, even if it currently seems that this particular deal is doomed to failure. All in all, by the time its many orders have been filled, Indonesia will fly some 200 of the most sophisticated combat aircraft on the market today in what will be, by far, the most international air force in the world. Now, next up, we're going to explore the method behind Indonesia's aerospace madness, but before we do, we've got to ask you another big question. Do you enjoy what we do here at WarFronts? You probably do. You're halfway through a video from us, so thank you. Do you want more episodes, though? More analysis, deeper insight into the stories that are shaping our world? Well, that's why we have recently unveiled Fronts.co, our brand new website designed to provide you with exactly that. Our writers at our WarFronts channel and at our sister channel, Political Fronts, gather at Fronts.co to take an even closer look at the global conflicts, the geopolitical intrigue, and the other strategic forces that shape our world. Every week, we release 2 exclusive video episodes that can't be found anywhere else, including our briefing room, a regular roundup of underreported stories that deserve your attention. Also, on Fronts.co, we publish 2 expert articles every week, drawing on journalists and analysts who've chosen to share their insights with our audience and the wider world. If you're enjoying this episode, you might like some recent episodes we've done on Brazil's revolutionary tactical airlifter, Indonesia's ignored insurgency, or a written article on the failures and the redeeming qualities of Russia's Su-57. If you'd like a taste of what our other content is like, you can subscribe to our free twice-weekly newsletter. There's a link down below, or visit our brand new subreddit r/frontsco. A subscription to Fronts.co costs just $5 a month and helps us grow our free offerings here as well, and also all the other secret projects that we've been cooking up behind the scenes. And now let's get back to Indonesia. Now, it's at this point in the episode that you'd be forgiven for starting to wonder, why is Indonesia doing all of this? What does Indonesia hope to achieve by picking up all 5 of these new advanced fighter models that it couldn't accomplish by leaning on 1 or 2? Well, anybody watching this episode with a deep knowledge of military aviation is well aware that many of these aircraft fill a lot of the same roles, and while each of them will have their respective strengths and weaknesses, those trade-offs aren't enough to justify building an air force this way. So either Indonesia's leaders are making these decisions based exclusively on the rule of cool, trying to impress the rest of the world in the way that, say, Saudi Arabia does with its fancy megacities, or there has to be some other reason to justify this approach. Luckily, for both the Indonesian military and the Indonesian taxpayer, the nation is motivated by more than just the mere desire to put on the coolest air shows in the Indo-Pacific, and we can start with Indonesia's desire to make up for lost time. All through the 90s and the early 2000s, Indonesia was a nation facing intense international sanctions, largely due to its conduct towards civilians in what's now the nation of East Timor and its military intervention and practices of near total war against the secession movement there. As such, Indonesia was barred from receiving new weapon systems from the US, the EU, and elsewhere, and it was only in 2006 that the last of the sanctions cleared. Prior to that, Indonesia had a similar experience with the Soviet Union. On one hand, that meant that Indonesia had gone through a period of time when it hadn't been able to purchase the kit that it wanted, instead taking a drip feed of whatever excess hardware that other nations could spare when they were intermittently open to working with Jakarta. But on the other hand, and much more important, it meant that Indonesia had learned a valuable and difficult lesson. If you make your arsenal dependent on a small number of foreign partners, then those foreign partners can cut you off. And you can't do anything about it. Now that Indonesia has had enough time to build up its savings, the nation has decided to pursue a path of strategic diversification, getting its military kit from as many sources as possible, even if it means more headaches and smaller individual contracts, in order to ensure that it never gets all that dependent on one supplier. If, let's say, Indonesia does something to royally piss off China and cause China to stop sending replacement parts or software upgrades for its J-10Cs, Indonesia knows that it can fall back on 4 other nations to help make up the gap, while only losing about a fifth of its best aircraft, at worst. Even better, by prioritizing contracts with countries that would consider each other rivals, Indonesia also makes it more costly for its supplier nations to consider cutting it off. Let's say it's the United States that's got some reason to be outraged with Indonesia and tries to cut off its sustainment chain for its American fighters. America can attempt that, but it has to consider that by doing so, it'll hand China a golden opportunity to provide the support and partnership that America won't. Similarly, Turkey and South Korea are both trying very hard to become major arms exporters and sell their advanced aircraft, and each of them could try and leverage that relationship with Indonesia to their own benefit, except that now, if either of them turn their back on Indonesia or cause some sort of offense, their direct rival is right there waiting to jump in and prove their superiority. From Indonesia's perspective, a diverse air force makes it harder for supplier nations to justify allowing friction into their relationship with Jakarta. It also ensures that if any of those nations do sour on Indonesia or its leaders, the nation's military readiness won't have to suffer. And the benefits of strategic diversification can apply at a far greater scale. Military supply deals, they're not like other international trade deals, especially for systems like advanced aircraft. They are a decades-long relationship that includes more than the initial round of deliveries. Nations in these sorts of relationships, they'll need spare parts, they'll need updates, training support, and a lot of other resources for as long as that given aircraft is in their arsenal, while nations that export their aircraft can enjoy the benefit of multi-billion-dollar deals that both sides have already committed to. Nations that sell or purchase arms from other nations generally tend to be friends with those nations, and in Indonesia's case, that means that it can more easily sustain friendships with all of those other nations at once. The United States and South Korea enjoy Indonesia's patronage. China enjoys Indonesia's patronage. France and Turkey enjoy it. And if Russia ever regains the ability to export weapons at scale, then Russia will probably continue to enjoy it too. From Indonesia's perspective, all of that's even more meaningful because it's a country with no direct regional rivals. Indonesia and Malaysia are never likely to go to war. Nations like Singapore, Brunei, or the Philippines aren't exactly trying to throw down with Jakarta, and it would be very out of character for modern Australia to opt into a conflict of any kind unless it absolutely has to. Indonesia does deal with an insurgency on its own soil on the island of Papua, but it hardly needs any sophisticated air power in order to maintain an advantage in that conflict. If Indonesia faces any existential military threat, then it would be as part of a much wider war in the Indo-Pacific, where coalitions led by China on the one side and the United States on the other would risk either labeling Indonesia as an enemy or seeing it caught in the crossfire. And that's particularly problematic because Indonesia, along with Malaysia and Singapore, preside over the Malacca Strait, a critical seaway that would almost certainly come under blockade or attack in the event of an all-out war. China's heavily dependent on that trade corridor, and it's not hard to see how either China or the US could justify heavy fighting around that zone. So, Indonesia's diversified air force and its policy of strategic diversification more broadly affords it two advantages. First, if either side did attempt to secure the strait by force, Indonesia would have lots of advanced warplanes at its disposal to try and deter or defend its territory. Better yet, Indonesia could lock down the strait directly, perhaps with the aid of Malaysia and Singapore, and then choose the side of the conflict that it would align with. But more importantly, Jakarta can also make sure that both Beijing and Washington, and Seoul in South Korea for that matter, treat it with the respect of a highly prized and respected export partner instead of a bunch of islands to be overrun in a game of Risk. Because the US, China, and all of these other nations have geostrategic interests tied in with Indonesia, they're less likely to risk disrupting that relationship if it's not absolutely necessary. And finally, Indonesia's wide arsenal of international combat aircraft, weapons, technology, simulators, and more offers it a chance to export something that no other nation could match. Once it secures the range of aircraft that it desires, Indonesia will be able to offer information on how those aircraft compare to each other directly in simulated combat. Indonesia will have the option to comb through each design for defects and shortcomings, pit them against each other in whatever ways Indonesia sees fit, and then, if Indonesia decides, it can offer that information to any and all international entities that it chooses. To get a sense of how important this is, we need only to wind back the clock to the aerial engagement we referenced a little while ago, between Indian Rafale jets and Pakistani J-10Cs during their confrontation in 2025. Since that encounter took place, nations have been working hard to try and figure out exactly what happened, how the two aircraft measured up, and why each of their capabilities did, or didn't, lead to success. According to French sources, China has even used rumors around the engagement to try and offer the J-10C over the Rafale for nations that are still looking to make a purchase of one of the two. And even Indonesia only publicly signaled its interest in the J-10C after that exchange took place, suggesting that Jakarta too might have been convinced. With so many advanced aircraft in its possession, Indonesia has the opportunity to engage in a process of study and data collection that no other nation could match for these specific platforms. Nor is it so simple as trying to figure out which fighter is the best in a head-to-head dogfight. Each of these aircraft comes with weapons, engines, an onboard digital architecture, and a range of other capabilities that the international community will really want to see measured against each other through a reliable partner that's able to crunch the numbers. Indonesia could use that information to level the global playing field, providing openly accessible data on which of these platforms are capable and which are not. Or it could sell access to that information, agreeing to share data or go out and collect specific results for a price. Or it could sell exclusive access to the highest bidders and hand the winning nation a real advantage in future conflicts, in exchange for what would be a substantial debt owed to Jakarta. Now, by pursuing such a diversified advanced air force, Indonesia has made itself all the more important in Indo-Pacific affairs. The nation is looking for positive relations with everyone. It can handle the pain of a temporary setback with anyone, and it's ensured that all these powerful countries are more interested in keeping Indonesia happy than winning whatever petty squabbles might come up over the course of the next few decades. Indonesia's ability to defend itself and its strategically critical territory will only grow with time. And soon, it'll be able to act as a repository of information that powerful countries will be very interested in getting their hands on. But Indonesia's strategy does come with a handful of lingering problems, and they're the sorts of problems that are too big to overlook. We've got to emphasize that Indonesia is not the only world nation that's capable of pursuing this kind of strategy, but it is the only nation that's taken strategic diversification this far. Other countries don't want to accept the kinds of risks that Indonesia has, and while Indonesia could reap the benefits of its decision, there are no guarantees that it will. The most obvious problem in all of this is that trying to maintain an air force this diverse and with this quality of hardware is a logistical nightmare. Even if we only account for the 5 advanced aircraft that Indonesia seems on track to be flying, by the time all of this is said and done, the training, supply, and support load for Indonesia is going to be massive. These 5 aircraft are each fairly different. They're certainly not directly interoperable, and in essence, Indonesia will need to set up 5 different training tracks for both its pilots and its maintenance teams. That's not even accounting for the difficulty of teaching other pilots to fly light attack jets or even propeller planes, which are an entirely different thing and aren't necessarily easier to fly just because they're less technologically sophisticated. The nation will need to sustain several different supply chains to several different base locations, and it's committing to the idea that it can fund those sustainment initiatives for decades all at once in a nation where defense funding has been an enduring challenge. It'll have to find a way to either make its aircraft interoperable or arm, maintain, and repair each of them separately, using a limited number of personnel on a limited number of air bases, sharing a limited pool of funds. In order to make that happen, Indonesia will need to stay the course, despite the push and pull of domestic politics, despite the turmoil of regional geopolitics, and despite the fact that if nations like the US and China are entering into a competition for Indonesia's favor, that competition is gonna get ugly. Indonesia could mitigate those challenges, at least somewhat, by treating its air force as more of a showpiece than an actual asset for its territorial defense. But that trade-off will come with problems of its own. As we've mentioned, Indonesia doesn't have much of a chance fighting a war against a regional peer in the near future. But if a war ever breaks out over Taiwan, then Jakarta is going to want a large modern air force to be ready to respond. There's a danger in Jakarta signaling to all sides that it isn't particularly loyal to any side in a future conflict, because that means that neither a China-led coalition nor a US-led coalition could be confident that Indonesia would actually come through for them. China needs the critical waterways under Indonesia's control, and the United States needs to ensure that China can't have them. If Indonesia is both a partner of questionable loyalty and the owner of a paper tiger military, then both Washington and Beijing could choose that in a state of all-out war, it makes more sense to act unilaterally toward Indonesia and get what they need on the assumption that they can smooth out any diplomatic hurt feelings at a later date. For all the risk that Indonesia is accepting, we've got to give credit to Jakarta anyhow, because if the nation can stay the course, then in a few short years it'll be home to one of the most fascinating air forces in history. Granted, it'll also be home to a logistical nightmare, a geopolitical minefield, and an air force that could just as easily become an albatross for Indonesia as a source of national pride. But that doesn't change the fact that right now, Indonesia is attempting something with its air force that no other country can rival, an exercise in unconventional strategic thinking that's on track to build one of the most unconventional air forces in living memory. Now the only question left is whether Indonesia can stick the landing. Thank you for watching.